and loosen up my tie a little bit. I just want to tell you all that I'm a clinical psychologist, been working for the VA for 22 years, and if you're hearing voices, it's okay, you're not going crazy. It's that little phone over here that seems to be coming through. The other thing that I want to say is I am a war veteran, as Justice Strutton has pointed out. My serial number is RA 15768-203. That's an important piece of information. It's an important piece of information because I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think is one of the most profound problems that we are facing with our young men and women, that we faced with the Vietnam veterans coming back, that we faced with the World War II veterans coming back, and that is reconnecting to society. It's not all about PTSD or PTS, however we want to call it. It's not all about TBI. It's not all about these medical problems that we hear about. These are very important. I would never want to put them aside. But I want to give you one variable that we all must pay attention to. And let me see this now. So I'm aware of this one. Okay. So I'm aware of the time. I could tell you all about what the VA is doing. They're doing a wonderful job. I could dazzle you with all our numbers. The VA is really good at numbers. We keep all kinds of numbers about everything all the time because we want to know how well we're doing. We know how many veterans we got. We know how old they are. We know what percentage of male, what percentage of female, what their diagnosis is, all kinds of things that we have data on and statistics on. We also have a lot of really great programs. You've heard Jim, you've heard our VJO specialist, even Mr. Hedrick has noted the wonderful programs that we have in the VA. And I want to tell you that because I've been with the VA for 22 years, I cannot tell you the immense change that has come about in the VA in the last 20 years since I have been there. It's just a complete and utter different organization. But one of the most profound things that the VA has done in these 22 years, for me anyway, is the VA has opened its doors to the community. It has decided to build partnerships and to collaborate with the community in helping the veterans of our nation. And why has it done that? Because it's come to the realization that it cannot do it alone. Impossible. Yesterday was my clinic day. I spent an hour with about 4 or 5 veterans. 1 hour. The rest of the week, that veteran is going to be out in the community. I cannot make the impact on that veteran's life on 1 hour a week that can be made with what he's doing out there. With his family, with his relatives, with his employer, with the justice system, with all the people that he lives with on an ongoing basis for the whole week. Sometimes I don't see him for a month. And the impact is still there out in the community. So we can't do it without the community. That has been a great change for me in seeing how the VA operates. We have acute centers in the VA, very good acute centers where we take care of them in the best way possible. I cannot tell you the amount of time that is spent on training all our clinicians in the VA with the very latest and greatest, and sometimes faddish, but evidence-based interventions that actually work. This has also been a profound change in the VA. All of these things that I'm showing you here, we have talked about. You can find them in our brochures. You can call people, our trained experts, our treatment for women, our military sexual trauma. It's something we don't talk about too often, but we at the VA, again, figures, almost 80% of the women coming into the VA for work have had some sort of military sexual trauma in their lives. That's a huge statistic. We have people at each VA designated to do nothing but work with these women. Very important aspect of our treatment, because nowadays 12% of the people coming into the VA are women, whereas in the 1990s it was about 3%, and back in the 80s it was about 1%. So women are climbing, they're climbing in the military, but they're also climbing in terms of receiving services in the VA. We have community outpatient clinics, which is probably, again, one of those profound things that we've done in the VA, is to build clinics in the communities surrounding the major metropolitan large VA hospitals. We're trying to establish these clinics so people don't have to drive an hour and a half or 2 hours to get to a VA, to get their services. And they love them. They love having a clinic in the community. Right there, people who live in the community, people who are aware of them, people who they feel are like family. This is very important. And again, I want to tell you that part of this whole system is developing this idea that the veterans coming back are trying to find a way to make a connection. Special projects, OIF, OEF case managers. Everybody, I hope, knows what OIF, OEF means at this point. Iraqi war, Afghanistan war veterans coming back, outreach to communities, Ohio Cares. Probably one of the most things that I never wanted to be in this field, coincidentally, when I came back from Vietnam. I never wanted to treat veterans. I never wanted to be engaged in veterans, and I'm gonna confess right now that one of the first things that I did when I came back from Vietnam was to take my military gear and throw it in a Dipsy dumpster. Didn't want anything to do with the military anymore. Confused, conflicted, torn. I'd seen too much. I was 19 years old. Didn't want to hear or see it anymore. I'm telling you that not because I want to confess, because you've got a whole bunch of veterans that are feeling that way, coming back from war. A whole bunch of them. They don't know who they are. They don't know what happened to them. One of the incredibly interesting things about this war, for me, is that when I see a young man sitting in front of me, as a clinician, I see a Vietnam veteran. I see the same young man over again. It's like deja vu, with the same issues, and the same problems, and the same concerns, and the same conflicts. Yes, the wars are different. We didn't have as much TBI in Vietnam, or at least we hadn't diagnosed it, which could be a problem because we don't really know if we had it as much. But so many of the issues are really, really the same. No one comes back unchanged. So while I could tell you all about what the VA does, what I really want to do is I want to tell you about, I want to change the scope. And I want to tell you about a particular person, a particular veteran that I have treated. His name is Bobby. It's not his real name, but you get the point. Before I give you Bobby's tale, which I won't take long, I realize I'm committed to a little bit extra time here, but I want you to read this statement. I fear they do not know us. This is Admiral Mike Mullen, used to be Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman. I fear they do not comprehend the full weight of the burden we carry or the price we pay when we return from battle. This is a poignant statement, not because it's necessarily true, but because this is the way that the veterans coming back from battle feel. They can't always voice it this way. They can't always tell you what it is. So I had this patient called Bobby. Bobby went to Vietnam. Bobby grew up in Cleveland. Bobby went to high school. He had B's and C's and did okay. And then when he got out, he of course went to the Selective Service and signed up like we all had to do back then. This was 1966. And Bobby signed up. And then Bobby got called up. Bobby had about a year or so working in the auto industry, one of the smaller auto industries companies that makes parts for autos. And he was doing okay, and he was happy, and he got married, and then he got called up, and he decided that he didn't want to just be called up, he wanted to be a Marine. And so Bobby became a Marine. And Bobby had a very good life prior to that. And he went to Vietnam, and he went to Da Nang. Those of you who know about Vietnam know where Da Nang is, up in the northern side, I Corps. And Bobby went through some horrendous, horrendous battles. One in which he lost all but 3 of his comrades. And he was wounded. And Bobby was bombed. He had a concussion, and he ended up in a hospital in Japan. And then he came back, and he got out early, on a medical actually, and he went to the VA, and Bobby was all over the place. And Bobby was angry, and Bobby couldn't concentrate, and Bobby was seeing things, and Bobby was hearing things, and he was having all these symptoms, and the VA at the time gave him a lot of antipsychotic medications. Put him in a hospital, in a VA hospital, gave him a lot of antipsychotic medications, and Bobby stayed there. And then when the medications finally kind of wore Bobby down and zoned him out, at the time, he doesn't really remember because he's a poor historian, but he thought he was giving some Xanax on top of everything else. Bobby got out, and he didn't want to go back to the VA because he didn't want to go back to that inpatient unit. He didn't want to go back to that place where everybody was crazy, where he was crazy. He didn't want to be crazy. He didn't want to have that stigma of being told there was something horribly wrong with him. So rather than going back to the hospital, Bobby started using marijuana. Now Bobby had already started using marijuana in Vietnam. And for those of you who don't know it, there were drugs in Vietnam. So Bobby started using drugs. And Bobby got into marijuana, and he got into alcohol. And then pretty soon Bobby started selling marijuana. And then pretty soon Bobby got on the opposite side of the law, and he was picked up. And he was tried and convicted, and he went to jail. So Bobby came back from jail. He was determined to get out of the drug trade and start changing his life, and he got a job. But Bobby couldn't work because Bobby couldn't concentrate. Because Bobby had something wrong with his brain, and he had something going on inside of him that was conflicted. But there was really one very important thing that was going on with Bobby that he didn't understand. He didn't feel like he belonged. He didn't feel like he was a member of this society anymore. He couldn't come back. He couldn't come back from the war. He couldn't come back and be a citizen. There was things about the way Bobby felt and the way Bobby thought and the way Bobby behaved that he felt were so different from everybody else that he couldn't make a connection. So Bobby slowly, he got a job, he got fired, he got married again, and then he got married again, and then he started selling again, and before Bobby knew it, he was in jail again. Jail is kind of an interesting place because if you tend to want to be an outlaw, if you don't feel accepted in society, if you feel like you're out of it, jail is a place to learn more about that and what it means and how you can live a life like that. And that's what Bobby learned. And so he came back, got a gun, committed an armed robbery, he went back to prison. Bobby was in prison for 15 years.